Okay, so we've just dry fit the rear main plate with the dowels in the block, and again we have, I don't know if I can show it, but we have a difference of height obviously from the actual block to the rear main plate, because the block has been machined for the PRP brace. Now this sits a little bit higher than it would on the dowels, so that's changed again. Remember, your crank center line is now going to be lower, which means we have to move the main plate, rear main plate down. So what we'll do is we'll just take out the rear main dowels, and then we'll do the same thing we did on the other one, except this time we're just going to use the rear main seal. It's a little bit easier because it's just springy, it'll push itself into the middle, and then we'll tighten it down. So now that we have the dowels out of the block, we can go ahead and we'll install our rear main seal into the rear main plate. I like to use Loctite on the outside. It does two things. Creates lubricant when it's wet, so you slide it in, and then when it dries, it locks the seal in place. You have to worry about it popping out. So I like to use just red Loctite. Okay, so now I have a little light coating of Loctite on the outside of the rear main seal. Place it square in the plate. And because it has a little bit of Loctite on the outside, it usually goes in just with thumbs. Perfect. And because we don't have it on the engine, we have the added benefit of being able to see if we have installed it all the way. And it looks like we have. There's 4 stoppers on all 4 corners to show that you have it in there square. And of course, it sits just inside the chamfer on the outside. So now that we have that installed, we'll go ahead, we'll clean our surface, and then we're going to install our rear main plate onto the block. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead, again, rubbing alcohol just like we've been using for everything else. Clean the mating surface on the plate. Let that dry, and we're going to do the same thing with the block. Now we're going to install the rear main plate. We just like to use Permatex Ultra Black. It's oil resistant, so this is kind of going to be your best bet for something you can just find off the shelf at any auto parts store. So we'll go ahead, we'll apply a light coating. It's okay if you mess up the application. We're just going to spread it out so it's a little more even, doesn't get stuck in areas we don't want it to be. And then you can just remove any excess that you have left on your fingers. We're going to go and be installing this on the back of the block. Now we're installing this on the back of the block because I need this on to install the brace. I'd love to take it off and then put it back on, but just for the sake of time, I'll sneak this in here. And then you're going to want to be careful when you put it onto the crankshaft itself. Make sure you don't roll the seal. Looks good. And we'll center it. Now again, because the rear main seal kind of has a spring to it, we're able to line up the sides of the rear main plate flush with the block fairly easily. And then we'll go ahead and we'll install our bolts. So now you have all your hardware into the rear main plate. Just one more time. Again, just make sure this is flush. And then we can go ahead and we can tighten down just the top 2 to start. Okay, once you have it snug down, you can just leave it hand tight for now. We'll torque it once we get off the stand. So now that we have our oil pump on, we have our rear main plate on, we can go ahead and we can move on to installing the brace for the final time. Finally, so what we're going to do is we're going to place the O-ring into the groove. We'll place the oil pickup O-ring into the groove. We're going to clean our surfaces here, and then we're going to apply a little bit of silicone around the O-ring, and then we're going to put it onto the block, torque it down, and then there's a couple other steps you have to do in there. We'll cover those when we get there. We got our O-ring put into the brace here. The O-ring doesn't want to stay very nicely, so I use a little bit of silicone to get it to stay in place. So I'm going to quickly go over it with the coat over the O-ring that they recommend in the instructions, and then we're going to clean the block quickly, slam it on there, and then torque it down. As you can see, all the O-rings completely installed. In the instructions, it is just a solid O-ring, so what you usually have to do is you're just going to run the O-ring around, and then you're going to meet the ends, and then you just silicone around the ends. This recommends you silicone the whole thing, just because this process sucks to take off again if you do have a leak. So make sure you're just using, you know, a generous amount of silicone. Make sure you don't have any issues with any oil leaks. So we're just going to run that bead of silicone and then install it on the block. Okay, so now we have a generous amount of silicone applied. A couple areas you got to focus on. This corner here, I've done several of these now, and this corner always loves to leak, so I like to be generous in this corner. The block casting kind of does something weird. The factory oil pan has the same issue, and it does like to leak in this area. And then also here, where you have your oil pickup O-ring, make sure you have no silicone in here, because if it does come loose, it's going straight to the oil pump and going to cause you some issues. So keep it behind the O-ring there. You don't want to have any sort of issues with that. And that's pretty much it. We'll go ahead and install it now. Okay, so now that we have our brace installed for the final time, we have to go ahead now. We're going to tape off the bottom, make sure it's totally sealed. You have to grind off each one of these heads of the bolts. Now they're permanently installed. Each one of these has to be removed so the stud or the bolt can fit right through. So we'll tape this off and then we'll grind those out. So now we have it taped off. I like to be nice and meticulous with the taping. You don't want to really have any sort of metal go into your freshly built engine, especially after installing the brace. It's quite the process to install it, so you don't have to take it out. And plus, once you get them down to full torque, it's, you know, we've already done it twice. The bolts get harder and harder to remove. So yeah, we're taped off. We're just going to go ahead now. We're going to remove the edges of each one of these bolts now. On what is this? 10 or so bolts. So we're just going to use, again, just like we did with the oil pump porting. Okay, now that we have all the bolt heads ground down and out of our way, we're going to go ahead. We already blew some compressed air through here. We're just going to wipe off any potential debris that might still be stuck around the tape. Usually sticks to the rag. We'll just toss that aside, and then we're just going to peel off the tape slowly. We're going to remove the center part last, just so we don't get any debris in there removing our tape. Okay, so we got our brace installed. We got oil pump and rear main installed. Next steps are just going to be pretty much dressing the block. We'll put the frost plugs in. We're going to put our water pump on, all of our oil gallery plugs, front and back. We'll put our Tark's oil plate on, and then whatever other accessories are on the exterior of the block. Then we're going to move on to the cylinder head and hopefully get that assembled pretty quickly. Most of the machine work is done, so we're just going to go ahead now and verify, clean, and assemble just like we did with the block.